temporary set of guidelines to inform their editorial decision-making. They need to ensure a continuity of values, trust, and organizational clarity in an evolving communications environment. Editorial Integrity for Public Media is a CPB-funded project guided by leaders of public media organizations across the country. Ted Critchell of Penn State Public Broadcasting and Tom Thomas of the Station Resource Group are here to report on the progress of the initiative and discuss preliminary recommendations. So here's Ted and Tom.
Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here today with Tom Thomas. Most of you know Tom. He, along with Terry Clipper and the Station Resource Group, which has played a central role in the creation, growth, and long-term success of America's public radio service. So why are we here? And what's so freaking important about editorial integrity? At a time when so many other alligators are chomping at the door, does this really matter to me or to you? We're here today to suggest that in a very real way, this does matter. Let's take a look at a couple of examples. The Nebraska Beef Council provided major funding of a Nebraska Public Television Network program on the history of beef called Beef State. To be fair, to ensure historical accuracy and lay viewer perception issues, NET also partnered with the State Historical Society, which served as co-producer. And Beef State adhered to all of NET's editorial standards. There were also additional funders involved, including the Nebraska Cattlemen Association and Farmers Mutual of Nebraska. We'll come back to this issue later, but a few questions you might consider would be, would a reasonable viewer wonder whether the program would yield an honest account? Does the addition of a respected entity like the State Historical Society negate perception questions? Does the nature of the historical subject matter? Is it different for the Beef Council to fund a program on the history of beef than another organization, an arts organization, for example, to fund a program on the history of marching bands? So Tom, how about another example?
Well, here's one that came from Jan Galmish at KETC. Many of us have heard about the outstanding job that they did in St. Louis around facing the mortgage crisis. Really kind of opening up a new era of engagement and participation in what they were doing. But Jack recounted to me not long after they had done their first really big public event that right before he was looking down the list of all of these organizations who were going to be showing up to join with them in a community-wide gathering to talk about this, and lo and behold, one of his partners was the FBI. And he said, I wasn't sure how they got there. And then I wasn't sure whether it was a good thing or a bad thing that they were there. But it provoked for Jack the notion of, as we open our doors up and partner across our communities to engage in new and different ways to take on very real issues, surprising folks show up and want to be part of the party. And we have to give careful thought to that, because every partner we partner with, as we are sponsoring and bringing these things to our community, reflects back on us and the expectations that people have about who we are and what we are. Now, these are two examples, both the beefsteak and the FBI here that came to us from station managers. But some of these examples, well, they kind of find us because they're so written about. Yeah?
Find us, they did. This next example, all of you have heard, I assume, of the UNC turning over the records to the state legislature. Let me read a little bit from Drew Septon, who wrote in Current. Is a public television station licensed to a state university system an agency of the state if a legislative committee says so? Attorneys and management in North Carolina's UNC TV network conceded that it is, and earlier this month obeyed a General Assembly Committee's demands that it turn over reporting materials from a journalist investigation into the licensing of hydroelectric dams by aluminum giant Alcoa. The acquiescence by the University of North Carolina Center for Public Television could have ramifications for public stations news gathering at a time when some are expanding their roles in journalism. At stake is the First Amendment independence of podcasters across the country, licensed to states and states' universities. Of the 584 licensees receiving operating funds from CPB, 214 in public radio and 76 in public TV are universities, a majority state-owned or other units of state government. Although the actions thus far may not amount to a legal precedent, the legislature's tactics could inspire imitation by officials in other states with state-operated stations. Does this apply to anybody in this room? How many folks here have had to deal with this? Certainly applies to me at Penn State. So Tom, we have one more, I think, example you may have heard of.
This is one we really couldn't dodge in a presentation like this. Your answers to these questions. Do you know where your employees are this evening and tomorrow? Do you know what they're saying other places than on your own air? Do you approve of what those things are? Well, there's been a lot written about this one, and a lot you've heard about it. We don't need to repeat it here so much as to say that this is just we believe, one example of many that are ahead of us as the unfolding environment in which we work creates more and more pathways and channels in which those who work with us and for us, those who are on our airs as employees or as contractors, find other ways to express their views and opinions. And each of us has to ask for ourselves, what should surround that? What's the appropriate framework for how we do that? What are the policies that should guide both ourselves as organizations and those individuals who work with and for us? There's a terrific post today on the website of the Poynter Institute, which for those of you not familiar with it, tracks a whole array of really cutting-edge journalism questions, looking not only at our situation here in public media in this regard, but across the full landscape of radio and television and print and others who have other issues just like the one that we've confronted with Juan Williams in their midst. The point of all of these illustrations that Ted and I are putting up here to kick this off is any of these things could happen to any of us. Not maybe exactly the way that they presented in Nebraska or in North Carolina or at NPR or in St. Louis. But this is the fabric of our work these days. These kinds of questions that surround the content that we create, how we create it, how we bring it to our communities, how it's perceived by those who use it. And we need to be prepared as individual organizations and as a system for these challenges. We believe that as we go forward into a changing environment, that the trust that we built up over the years is perhaps our most important asset that we carry forward. We don't really know exactly what platforms or channels we'll be presenting on 10 years or 15 years from now. We don't know the combinations of media and pathways through which we'll be reaching people. But we who are involved in this project absolutely believe that if we do our work right, a great deal of the power that we will have, the impact that we will have on the communities and on the country, will because we've continued the trust that we've earned over 40 years of work in public broadcasting. This is what the American people tell us when they're asked who do they trust. It's us. In poll after poll, year after year, questions asked in different ways, not just by us, but by folks like Nielsen and Roper and Gallup and others, consistently. Public television, public radio come at the very top of who Americans turn to and trust for what is presented to them. It's our obligation to carry that forward. But what about that changing environment? It's easy to just, we're in a changing media landscape. How many have written that in a proposal or a report or something? But it's worth thinking for a moment about the dimensions of change that surround us, all of which can affect the integrity of what we do and the trust that our users have in it. Of course, the technology is changing. It's just a given. And that is a change that will be with us for years and years to come. The new normalism will be different next year. But that technology itself changes the character of how content comes to the user, how we create it, how we present it, what it's adjacent to, what it's linked to, how it's shared. Technology changes the framework in which we try to elicit the best results of our content and preserve the trust with those who use it. The audience itself is changing around us every bit as much as the technology that we use, the character, the demography of our communities is changing. And the standards and expectations of earlier generations and of a different constituency that once was at the core of what our audience is may be different as we go forward and realize our ambitions, as said in the Public Broadcasting Act, as said in so many of our missions, to reach all of our communities, to give particular service to the underserved, to meet the needs of our community. And if we truly do that in communities that are changing, I think the character of our work will need to change with it. Thirdly, expectations of partnerships. In the earliest days of doing certainly what I did in my career, and I suspect for many in this room, it was a pretty much go-it-alone thing for public radio and public television. We had the idea, we had the show, we put it on the air, end of the story. Today, the expectations of what public media is about so much spill out into partnerships with all kinds of other entities, creative partners, community partners, to make possible what we do. That too has both opportunity and risk for us. And lastly, a point we're going to return to several times over the course of this presentation, the ascendancy of transparency as an increasing expectation, not just of us in public media, but of other media and of others in the nonprofit sector. We are at a confluence of where, at this point in the 21st century, the expectations of the public, both of those who serve it through media and those who serve it through the nonprofit sector, need a transparency in their work, in their funding, in their content, and how they do what they do. All of these call for a new response from us.
So in this changing environment, we need principles, policies, and practices to ensure that we maintain this public trust. Now, as we were developing this project, I appreciate particularly Byron Knight, who kind of coined this approach for how we should approach this particular initiative. We start with the principles. Principles should be principles that all of us across this system could embrace and sign off to. They should be what you can tack on the wall and you can point to as the guiding principles for how we do our business. As we move down further, we start to get into areas of judgment that could vary according to type of licensee or station governance. So you start to look at policies, sort of framing how a particular station might approach its content creation and programming efforts within its local community. Then you get into specific practices about what do we accept, what funding might we accept, or how would we go about this. So they get increasingly specific, but they also get increasingly unique to your particular area. We do not intend in this initiative to try to come up with a Bible that you should follow or we should all follow literally. This is a process that we are hoping will engage each station and you will then take it through on your own particular set of issues and needs and perhaps come out with very different conclusions in different locations. The Editorial Integrity Initiative started actually, I was looking at the calendar, almost 2.5 years ago. It started in the Infinity Group Coalition. I think Rob Schumann was there at the time. We felt then in that group that we needed as a system to start to articulate what these issues were. As we were putting it together, it was very clear immediately that we needed to embrace the radio community in a very real way. And Tom Thomas was the obvious person at SRG to help to do that. We created a steering committee that has about 20 members now representing radio and television across the country. We went to CPB and they were willing and generous about putting up some seed funding to help us get through this phase of the project. And that's where we are today.